Hello and welcome back. Before we get into today's video, sit with one number for a second. 20 years. That's not a scare tactic and it's not a guess. If you retire at 65 today, the average retirement in America now lasts about 20 years. For a lot of people watching this, it will be longer than that. And there's a detail buried in the research that should bother you more than the number itself. When researchers actually asked adults over 60 how long a 65-year-old man is expected to live, fewer than half of them got it right. Most people guessed short. They pictured a retirement that lasts 12 or 15 years, built their plans around that shorter number in their heads, and never went back to correct it. So today I sat down with what a group of retirement researchers and one of the largest retirement services providers in the country have documented as the measured regrets of American retirees. Not opinions, regrets collected from people who already lived through the decisions you're about to make. Some of what's coming is going to be uncomfortable, especially if you're within a few years of retiring and you haven't looked closely at some of these numbers yet. I'd rather you feel a little discomfort right now watching a video than feel it 18 years from now with no way to undo it. So let's get into it. There's a nurse named Bronnie Ware who spent years working in palliative care, sitting with people during the final weeks of their lives. She kept notes on what people told her when the end was close, and eventually she published the 5 things she heard most often. Listen to this list closely, because it matters for everything that follows. People wished they'd had the courage to live a life true to themselves instead of the life others expected of them. They wished they hadn't worked so hard. They wished they'd had the courage to express their feelings. They wished they'd stayed in touch with friends. And they wished they'd let themselves be happier. Notice something about that list. Not one of those 5 things is about money. Nobody on their deathbed says, I wish I'd had a bigger portfolio. Nobody says, I wish I'd picked a better mutual fund. So if none of that is about money, why do the actual retirement surveys, the ones that go out and ask real retirees what they regret about their financial decisions, come back with answers that are just as consistent, just as strong, and almost entirely about money? Once you see the answer, it's simple. Money was never the destination. Money was the thing that either bought people those 5 moments or quietly took them away without anyone noticing until it was too late. The TIAA Institute published a report this year called Bridging the Gaps in Retirement Expectations. They surveyed people who are already retired, already living the life, already past the point where they can go back and redo any of it. And the results line up almost exactly with what other researchers have found in different years using different groups of people. More than 3/4 of current retirees, 76%, say they regret not starting to save earlier in their lives. Nearly the same number, 71%, wish they had saved more overall. Sit with those 2 numbers for a second, because that's not a small, disgruntled minority. That's most retirees in the country, looking back and telling you the exact same thing. This is the regret that shows up first in almost every study. And it's the one I want to slow down on, because it's the one most people watching this can still do something about. If you're still working, even a few years out from retirement, the math on starting earlier versus starting later isn't close. Money you put in now has more years left to compound than money you put in at 62. And if you've already retired, this regret isn't really about the past. It's about whether your current plan is built around what you have or around what you wish you'd saved. Those are 2 different plans, and a lot of people are quietly living inside the second one without realizing it. This is exactly the kind of gap that's easy to miss, because it doesn't show up as a single bad decision. It shows up as a dozen small ones stacked on top of each other over 20 or 30 years. A contribution you meant to increase and never did. An account you meant to open and kept putting off. A raise that went entirely into lifestyle instead of savings. None of those moments feel like a mistake at the time. They only look like one from 20 years down the road, which is exactly why the 76% number exists in the first place. If that's sounding a little close to home, that's worth paying attention to instead of pushing past it. Because here's the actual situation most people are in. You already know saving early matters. Everyone does. That was never the missing piece of information. The problem is that knowing it in general and knowing exactly where your own plan has a gap right now with your own numbers are 2 completely different things. And that gap doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send you a letter. It just sits quietly inside your accounts, compounding in the wrong direction, for however many years you go without looking closely at it. That's how a person ends up in the 76% without ever making one single bad decision they could point to. It's 30 small, reasonable-sounding choices, never added up, never checked against reality. That's the exact reason I put together the Retirement Behavior Audit. Not to convince you that saving early matters. You already know that part. It exists to walk through your own specific decisions and show you, in plain language, without jargon, exactly where your plan matches the pattern we just talked about and where it doesn't. Not the average retiree's plan, yours. The regular price on the audit is $47. And for what it actually walks you through, that's a fair number on its own. I've set it at $27 because the entire point of a video like this is removing reasons for someone to put off looking at their own numbers. And a higher price tag is exactly the kind of reason people use to talk themselves out of it. There's a link below this video whenever you're ready for it. Now let's get into the regret that worries me even more than this one. Here's what worries me more. 47% of retirees in that same TIAA study regret not having clear retirement goals. 49% regret underestimating healthcare and long-term care costs. 49% regret not planning for late life events, health issues, job loss, having to step in and care for a parent or a spouse. And 51% of the people in this survey say they were forced to leave the workforce for more than a year because of something they never saw coming. Sit with that last one for a moment. 51% didn't choose when they stopped working. Life chose for them. A health scare, a layoff, a family emergency, and suddenly the retirement plan that assumed I'll work until 67 collapsed into I'm retiring now, ready or not. If your entire retirement income plan is built around a specific age, you'll stop working. More than half the people who've already lived through this are telling you that assumption didn't hold for them either. This pattern isn't unique to one study. The Nationwide Retirement Institute looked at people who retired within the last 5 years and found more than half, 55%, have regrets about how they saved. 28% wish they'd started earlier, and only 40% say they're actually on track with their original retirement budget. That means 60% are not. The Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found 78% of retirees wish they'd saved more, and 68% wish they'd had more knowledge about saving and investing in the first place. Notice that second number carefully. Not more money, more knowledge. They didn't know what they didn't know, and by the time they found out, the working years available to fix it were already gone. Now, let's talk about the one regret on this entire list that's different from all the others, because it's the only one where the door actually closes behind you permanently on a clock that starts ticking the moment you make the decision. Every regret we've covered so far, not saving enough, not having clear goals, not understanding healthcare costs, those are things you can start correcting today. But there's one decision in retirement where the government gives you exactly 12 months to change your mind, and after that, it's locked in for life. That decision is when you file for Social Security. Claim at 62 instead of your full retirement age, and your monthly check is permanently reduced by somewhere around 30% for every single month of the 20-plus years you're going to spend retired. Because cost of living adjustments are calculated as a percentage of that base number, every future increase comes in smaller too, quietly compounding the loss for life. Most people don't realize the Social Security Administration will let you undo the decision. It's called a withdrawal. But you only get 12 months from your first payment to request it, once in your entire life, and you have to repay every dollar already received just to qualify. That's why this regret shows up in study after study. The Nationwide Retirement Institute found 83% of recent retirees started collecting before reaching full retirement age. Multiple surveys separately found somewhere between a third and nearly 40% of retirees wish they had waited longer. And a University of Michigan Retirement and Disability Research Center study found roughly 1 in 5 retirees carry specific, lasting regret about their Social Security timing. I want to be fair here. I'm not trying to scare you into thinking every early claim was a mistake. There are legitimate reasons people file early. Health problems, a layoff at 59 that never turned into another job, a spouse who needed care. Researchers at the University of Southern California studied this directly and found that most people who claimed early don't regret it, because for their actual circumstances, it genuinely was the right call. But it is about making sure the decision is an actual decision, made with open eyes, and not something that happened to you because nobody explained the 12-month window or what a 30% a permanent reduction means stretched across 20 years. That's the difference between an informed choice and an accidental one. Now here's a regret that runs in the opposite direction of everything we've covered so far, and it's not something you'll find in a formal survey. It's something that shows up again and again when you actually sit down and talk to people in their late 70s and 80s about how their retirement went. Some of them, when asked what they'd do differently, don't say, "I wish I'd saved more." They say the opposite. They wish they had spent more earlier, back when they still had the health and the energy to actually enjoy the money. This isn't a statistic from a research institute the way the other numbers in this video are. It's an observation that comes up often enough from people who lived the entire arc of retirement that it's worth naming even without a formal study behind it. Think about what that actually means. You spend 30 or 40 years being disciplined. You max out the account. You skip the vacation because it feels irresponsible. You tell yourself you're building security for later. And then later finally arrives, and you do have the money, but your knees don't work the way they used to. Travel feels harder than it once did. and the window where that money could have bought you something meaningful has quietly gotten smaller than you ever expected. This is the mirror image of the 76% who wish they'd saved more, and it's exactly why this was never really about a specific dollar amount. It's about timing. Save too little and you spend your final 20 years worried about running out. Save everything and spend almost nothing, and you spend those same final 20 years with money sitting in the bank and less physical ability to actually enjoy it. The goal was never the number on the account statement. The goal was matching the money to the years you actually have left to use it. Let's move quickly through a few more of these, because on their own they sound small, but stacked together they explain a lot about why so many retirees end up disappointed by a plan that looked perfectly fine on paper. Carrying debt into retirement is one of the most common regrets retirees describe. Car payments, credit cards, student loans still being paid at 65, sometimes even a mortgage that never got paid down. Every one of those payments now comes out of a fixed income that doesn't have the flexibility a paycheck used to give it. Not planning specifically for fun is another. It sounds almost silly to call a regret, but retirees who never set aside money for travel, hobbies, or helping grandchildren often find themselves financially able to retire, but somehow unable to enjoy it, because every dollar was already assigned to bills and nothing was assigned to living. Underestimating healthcare costs shows up over and over. Medicare doesn't start until 65, and even after that, premiums, supplemental coverage, and long-term care consistently run higher than people expect. 49% of retirees in the TIAA study said this exact thing caught them off guard. Investing too conservatively or too aggressively for your stage of life is a quieter regret, but a real one. Some retirees kept everything in stocks right up until a downturn hit at the worst possible moment. Others went so conservative so early that inflation quietly ate away at savings that could have kept growing. Handing too much control to a financial advisor without a second opinion or a clear sense of what's being done with your own money is a regret people describe with real frustration. Paying high annual fees year after year without ever calculating what those fees add up to across 2 or 3 decades is closely related. Not planning for required minimum distributions and Roth conversions is more technical, but it costs real money. Skip converting traditional retirement accounts early, and the government's forced withdrawals later can push you into a higher tax bracket in your 70s on money you already earned decades before. And the simplest one on the list, the one people call almost embarrassing once they see it, not getting the full employer match before they stopped working. That's free money left on the table, gone the moment you walk out the door for the last time. Underneath every single one of these is the same pattern. It's never that people didn't care. It's never that people were careless about their own future. It's that almost every regret on this list traces back to not having an actual plan written down, tested against reality, and revisited before it was too late to change anything. People worried instead of planning. They meant to look into it later. They assumed Medicare would cover what it needed to. They assumed the market wouldn't drop right when they retired. They assumed they'd get around to figuring out Social Security timing eventually. And 20 years is a long stretch of time to spend living inside an assumption that turned out to be wrong. The retirees who don't carry these regrets describe the same thing when you ask what they did differently. They sat down, put the actual numbers on paper, and ran the real scenarios. A market drop in year 1, a health event forcing early exit, Social Security claimed at 62 instead of 67, and decided based on what they saw, not on what they hoped would happen. That's the entire difference between the 76% who wish they'd done something differently and the smaller group who look back with something closer to peace. It was never about being smarter or starting out with more money. It was about seeing the actual picture clearly before the decisions became permanent. So let's bring this back to you, watching right now. Maybe you're 5 years out from retiring. Maybe you're already there, and some of what you just heard landed closer to home than you expected. Either way, every regret we just went through was preventable. And every person who ended up living it had the same 20, 30, 40 years you have right now to catch it before it became permanent. The people in these surveys weren't careless or unintelligent. They assumed they'd figure it out along the way, the same way most of us quietly assume things about our own future. The only real difference between them and the retirees who don't carry these regrets is that somewhere along the way, someone forced the second group to actually look at their own decisions before those decisions became unchangeable. Let's go back to Bronnie Ware's 5 regrets for a moment, because this is the piece that ties the whole video together. Nobody on their deathbed regretted a specific number sitting in a bank account. What they regretted was staying close to people they loved, having the courage to live honestly, letting themselves actually feel happy while there was still time left to feel it. Every financial regret we've talked about today connects to one of those 5 things, even when it doesn't look like it. The couple who claimed Social Security too early and now watches every dollar, that's less freedom to see their grandkids without worrying about the cost. The retiree who saved everything and spent almost nothing until their health declined, that's a missed trip, a missed experience, gone for good. The person still paying off debt at 70, That stress on top of years meant to be the reward for 4 decades of work. Money was never the actual point of any of this. Money was always just the thing standing between you and those years feeling the way you always pictured they would. You have, on average, 20 years ahead of you in retirement. Some of you have quite a bit more than that. That's a long stretch of time to get wrong, and an even longer stretch to spend, distracted by problems that were almost entirely avoidable with a little bit of honest looking early on. 15 minutes with this video is a small price to pay for something that could otherwise follow you for 2 decades. If any part of this list felt uncomfortably familiar, if you already know you haven't looked closely at your Social Security timing, or you're not sure your spending plan actually matches how long your money needs to last, or you've simply been avoiding the whole conversation because it feels like too much to untangle, that discomfort is worth paying attention to rather than pushing past. It's the same discomfort every person in these surveys felt right before they made the decision they'd go on to regret. Except you're feeling it now, while there's still time left to do something with it. That discomfort is exactly the situation the retirement behavior audit was built for. The problem most people run into isn't a lack of willpower or a lack of caring about their own future. It's that nobody ever sits them down and shows them, plainly, where their own decisions actually sit against the patterns we just walked through today. The saving, the Social Security timing, the debt, the spending plan. Left unexamined, that gap doesn't fix itself. It just quietly turns into one more version of the 20 years we talked about at the start of this video. The audit walks you through exactly that, in plain language, using your own numbers instead of national averages. It's normally $47, and I've priced it at $27 because a lower price removes the last reasonable excuse to keep avoiding a conversation that's worth having with yourself, not because there's some countdown running on this page. The link is right below this video whenever you're ready to look. Work through it at your own pace and find out exactly where your own plan actually stands before those 20 years start counting down instead of adding up in your favor. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If any part of this put something into focus for you, I genuinely appreciate you passing it along to someone else who's getting close to this same decision, because there's a good chance it's exactly what they need to hear right now too. I'll see you in the next one.